it's going to get rough for a while. That's the bad news. The good news is, A, we've been through this before and we know how to do this. What we thought was going to happen a year and a half ago is now happening. In other words, it's a sweep through really fast and really hard. And number two, because it's sweeping so fast and so hard, it's going to burn through fairly quickly. I mean, we'll see. My guess is April, May, it'll start really petering out badly, but, we'll see. So, we can talk about that. How is this affecting you and your friends and neighbors and all that kind of stuff? Also, I want to get into the Build Back Better. Joe Manchin on Sunday told Fox News that he's a no on Build Back Better, which kills the bill. There's actually some good news around that, and I'll get into that. Actually, several dimensions of good news associated with that. We'll get into that. In our second hour, Pfizer executives are saying that COVID could become endemic by 2024. What will life be like then? We can discuss that. We will discuss that. And Professor Richard Wolff will be there. I'll be asking him, what will be the impact of Omicron now over the next few months? And Pfizer saying that, the COVID is going to be, pandemic until 2024. Also, are the banks cutting the GDP forecast because Build Back Better is going down? We'll talk to the economics professor Richard Wolff about that. And in our third hour, does Joe Manchin really think that parents are, this is just insane. He just came out and said the reason he's opposed to giving parents child tax credits is because they'll use the money to buy drugs. Is this really what this guy thinks of the citizens of West Virginia? I realize they had a terrible opioid crisis there because the Sackler family was pushing this stuff and then succeeded in walking away with billions and billions of dollars because the Republicans let them get away with it. But really? Anyhow, we'll get to all that. I want to start, though, today with my rant today from HartmannReport.com. It's titled, The In Emergency Break Glass Moment for Democracy is Here. And what I'm talking about is this: there is a potential power, a coiled force, a tightly coiled force that's been quietly waiting for a real emergency, a genuine crisis. It's buried deep in our Constitution. It's in the fourth section of Article 4 of our Constitution, and it's been sitting there unused for 232 years. And I'm saying it's time to unleash it. The founders of this country, and the framers who wrote the Constitution created, as Ben Franklin famously said, a constitutional republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. A government, quote, deriving its just powers from the consent of the governed, end quote, through citizens, then, of course, white men, but now everybody's right to vote. They referred to that as republicanism, after the Greek Republic and the Roman Republic. And when they put it into law, they called it a republican form of government. No relation to the party, obviously. Because today that Republican form of government is under attack by Republicans, ironically, in red states and in swing states all across our country. So this emergency break glass provision that's in the Constitution is Clause 4 of Article 4. It's called the Guarantee Clause, and it's the basis of the Right to Vote Act. The Guarantee Clause, however, has never, ever been used. But it comes alive. And actually, one of the reasons why the Guarantee Clause explicitly says every state is guaranteed by the federal government a Republican form of government. In other words, the will of the voters will be respected. And it's never been used as part of our everyday politics because back in the 1850s, actually, I think it was the late 1840s, Chief Justice Roger Taney, who was the guy who did the Dred Scott decision about a decade later in 1856, in the late 1840s, as Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, he was concerned that this guarantee of a Republican form of government in Article 4 of our Constitution, the Guarantee Clause, could be used to end slavery, because slavery was an explicit, violation of Republican rights, of the right to vote. And so he said, this is a political piece of the Constitution. It has to be acted on by Congress. It's not something that the judiciary can respond to. And in fact, 3 times now, maybe 4, the Supreme Court has explicitly ruled, the most recently by John Roberts in 2019, that the guarantee clause of the Constitution can only be invoked by Congress. It can't be invoked by the judiciary. And that's exactly, by the way, what Congress is doing with the Freedom to Vote Act. Now, I lay out in the article, I give you the whole history of this. I go back to the Constitutional Convention to July 18th, 1787. On that day, they had a debate about this clause. And what's obvious from the debate is that these people, in fact, almost the entire debate was among abolitionists. These people wanted to make sure that if what had happened in Massachusetts back in the 1600s, when Massachusetts was taken over by the Pilgrims, was taken over by theocrats, and turned into essentially a religious monarchy, it was so bad that Roger Williams fled Massachusetts, and started Rhode Island as a place for religious freedom. That they wanted to make sure that that never happened again, that if an individual state, say Florida, were to decide that they were no longer going to respect the will of their voters and were just going to set up their own little kingdom, that the federal government could come riding in and save the republic. That's what the guarantee clause does. And I lay out in my piece over at HartmannReport.com, and I think it's an absolutely fascinating little bit of history that most Americans are completely unaware of. I had to go back. I spent most of the afternoon yesterday rereading James Madison's notes on the Constitutional Convention. And there's a whole bunch of quotes in there from it. I think, you know, if you love history, this is going to blow your mind. But this was, like I said, in 1849, in the Luther v. Borden decision, Roger Taney said, courts can't use this. It has to be Congress. And so the opening to the Freedom to Vote Act says, and I quote, Congress finds that it has both the authority and responsibility as the legislative body for the United States to fulfill the promise of Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, which states, quote, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government, end quote. Whoa. So Congress is finally saying, we're going to actually exercise that power. We're going to use that power that the framers put in the Constitution 232 years ago. Actually, they put it in 234 years ago. It was ratified 232 years ago. We're going to use that power with the Right to Vote Act, which provides for, or the Freedom to Vote Act, excuse me, which, by the way, has Joe Manchin as one of its co-sponsors. This can pass. It provides for automatic voter registration, online registration for 16-year-olds so that they can vote in the next election when they turn 18. Same-day voter registration nationwide. Ends partisan gerrymandering. Limits campaign contributions to 10 grand. Criminalizes pass-through groups to get around campaign finance laws. Requires companies to fully and rapidly disclose all election spending over $10,000. Requires all websites like Facebook with over 50 million users to make a publicly available, publicly searchable archive of political ads. Brings web-based election expenditures under the same disclosure rules as TV. Makes it a federal crime to prevent a person from registering to vote or to prevent a person from voting. It requires 14 consecutive days of early voting, at least 10 hours each day. It requires easy access to polling places for rural and college campus voters, and easy access for voting for all voters by public transportation. It guarantees that all voters can put themselves on a permanent vote-by-mail list and automatically receive a ballot in the mail, nationwide. It requires states to give voters the ability to track their mail-in ballots to make sure they're counted. It forbids states from forcing mail-in voters to have their ballots witnessed, notarized, or jump through other hoops. It requires secured and clearly labeled ballot drops boxes all across the nation. It requires states to keep voting lines shorter than 30 minutes in all cases and places. It prohibits voter caging, where failure to return a postcard gets you purged. It prohibits states from deleting voters from the rolls because they haven't recently voted. It empowers voters to sue in federal court any state or local officials who interfere with their right to vote. It criminalizes intimidating, threatening, or coercing any election official or election worker, and requires federal prosecution of anybody who tries to dox an election worker. It makes a federal crime to publish or distribute false information about elections. You know, like we've seen in the last couple of elections where on Facebook they're saying, oh, yeah, go out and vote. If you're voting Democratic, vote on Wednesday. If you're voting Republican, vote on Tuesday. Right, that kind of stuff becomes a crime. It keeps partisan poll watchers at least 8 feet from voters under all circumstances. Requires paper ballots in all cases and in all elections. There are voting machine exceptions for disabled voters. It requires post-election audits and provides criminal penalties for any candidate or campaign that fails to fully and immediately report any interactions with foreign governments, like, you know, the Trump campaign did before 2016. And it gives everybody in America, everybody in America below a certain income threshold, $25 that they can use to pass along to their favorite candidate. This is amazing. We need to pass this thing, the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We need to do it so my friend Joe Madison can start eating again. We need to do it to restore democracy to America. And we need to do it, well, as Ben Franklin said, you know, it's a republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. Are we going to keep it? I say we must. Anyhow, you can find it all, complete with that extraordinary history from the Constitutional Convention from July 18, 1787, all over at HartmannReport.com. We'll be right back.